purpose of Shadim?
Oh, yeah, we're gonna go into that.
What is Shadim here for? It's just like another kind of malach that just has some kind of mission.
Well, in order, yeah. Well, Ramchal is going to talk extensively about that, but which really, the concept of Shadim in many ways. I mentioned last week what their nature was, right? Half man, not half man, half physical and half spiritual, and Shadim, which Shadim are demons and so on. You know, Shadim are agents. Shadim are agents of the Sitra Achra, Satan, and they are used in that vein. You see, they are used in a way which are able to control, which we're going to talk about. There are certain forces of mankind. There are certain spiritual forces which control the world, and Shadim, Ramchal says later on, have access to those forces. You see, so Shadim are really part of the department of the sun. That's really why, and so on. You know, we see from the Gemara that sometimes Shadim, you know, were beneficial. I want to tell you a story last week about Shadim and so on. You know, but basically they are in the camp of the Sitra Achra, and they do his bidding, and that's basically what it is. So.
They're the minions of the Satan?
Yeah, that's right. They are the minions of the Satan, correct. There are other, it's called Malchi Chavola, you know, angels of destruction and so on. But that's, a Malchi Chavola is totally spiritual.
So it was
but a shade is half and half, and they, like you said correctly, they are minions of the Satan, yeah. And many times they are used to control those things that can control us, and in that way they can wreak havoc, you know. But in order to understand that, you have to understand the other components of the spiritual world, which I'm going to get into. Yeah.
Is it an einish of the shade itself?
Is a who?
Einish of the shade itself. Was he once here as a different form, and then he becomes shadim, or it's straight like spiritual?
No, they were created separately by Ben Hashmashas. Remember that in Bereshis? The Shadim were created Ben Hashmashas, I think, right? You know, and so on, as part of the team, the empire of the Satan. You know. In any case, okay. So the Ramchal talks about what he's right now into is the components of the components of the universe, actually, you know. Yeah. Now, what the Ramchal says is a very important part of the construction of the Bria, of the creation. We look at the universe, it's physical. Okay. But there are spiritual entities. And he mentioned, Malachim are one, angels. And the concept or the purpose of angels is to do what? Is agents to do the bidding of God. You see, that's what a Malach does. That's his assignment. Each Malach has his own assignment, okay, what the Baruch Hu wants him to do. How does a Malach know? Because what happens is a Malach, it arises in his consciousness that the Baruch Hu, in a certain sense, is talking to him. It's not Nevuah, obviously, he's a Malach, so on. But what happens is when the Baruch Hu wants a Malach to do something, then all of a sudden he knows what to do, and he knows it's coming from God, from the Baruch Hu. And the third thing is that he has the energy to carry it out. It's a package deal. He knows what the Baruch Hu wants, he knows that it is from God, and he has the energy to carry it out. And that's the way the Baruch Hu wants to rule his universe, through Malachim. The Baruch Hu does not interact, or in a sense that you could see he's interacting with creation. Not at all. You know, he wants to interact through an empire called Malachim. They are his agents, and they do his bidding. You see, and in a certain sense, Malachim, most Malachim do not have Bechira. They don't have free will. There are, however, Malachim that do. The higher order of angels do have free will, which is interesting. But it's not that they have free will. They're not going to go against what God says. But therefore, a malach can make a mistake. That's why. Because obviously, if you don't have free will, you can't make a mistake. You see, that was the malach of when he came to cure Lot. I mean, to take Lot away, and so on. He says, the malach said, I am sending. The malach should have said, God is sending. That was a mistake. And I think he was thrown out of heaven for a couple hundred years, or whatever that was, and so on, So the question is, how can a malach make a mistake? And the answer is because he does have free will in a certain sense. Not that he's going to go against God, but so therefore they can be punished.
So
yeah.
it's practical free will or internal free will or essential free will?
No, it would be an essential free will.
Meaning my question is, they have essential free will, just they don't have practical free will. It's like the jumping into the fire analogy. You technically have free will to jump into a fire, but in all practical sense, you do not have free will.
Yeah, I would go with that.
That's
because every God is everywhere.
That's what you mean by them not having free will, meaning essentially they really do, but they will never.
They will never do it. Yeah, of course, because they live in obviously a dimension where the presence of the Hashem is complete. Why would they do that? So the Hashem wants to have a universe in which the ones who do His will are the agents, and there are many types of malachim, many types of angels that are employed. We don't even have no idea who they are, what they are, and their number. It's beyond imagination. And I once mentioned that malachim can interact with humans. However, then they have to assume a physical garb of which is not them, And then they can talk. You see, the Torah is filled with malachim talking with Daniel and the other, and so on, all through Tanakh and so on, So that's a major component of the spiritual universe is malachim. Okay. Now, there's another major component which Ramchal is going to talk about, which is very important. And what is that? We look at a physical thing here, you see. So we can ask ourselves, well, what does this have to do with spirituality, really? What the Hashem created is something very interesting. There is a place in the universe, probably Olam Bria, that dimension. What the Hashem did is He created a replica of the entire physical universe. It's a replica. He called it a koyach nivdal. A koyach nivdal is a transcendental force. It's a replica of you up there, which is interesting. And it's all of us have a replica in another dimension, which is really us. Every single aspect of us has a counterpart, replica, spiritual counterpart in the upper world. See, and what happens is that's really us. And what happens is that filters down. It's like a long chain, and ultimately manifests itself as us. So really, what it is that all of us start in another place, and it pops out, as far as we're concerned, here. You see, so we don't know of ourselves up there. But our origin is really spiritual. In other words, the origin of the physical universe is spiritual. Not that there's a spiritual and there's a physical. There's an entire world that is spiritual, but that is the counterpart, the replica, the model of the entire physical universe.
You don't just mean us, you mean the whole Bria.
The whole Bria.
Not just humans.
Not just humans, correct.
The whole Bria has a replica.
Yeah, up in Shemaim, yeah. It means any physical thing must have a spiritual replica up there.
So you're referring not to the neshama, you're referring to the guf.
The neshama is not part of that.
So
correct.
In terms of the guf,
physical universe, yes. In terms of our guf, correct, yeah. So all things physical must have a spiritual origin in an upper world.
But how would you explain why?
Now, that's a very important idea, that we are really, even the physical being starts out, or the origin is a spiritual entity, which is really us.
I mean, everything is physical. Everything is spiritual.
Correct.
Let's say a table. What is a table?
Same thing. It has a spiritual entity up there that represents this table. In other words, there's no such thing as a physical object that has no spiritual counterpart. There's no such thing. Every physical, and in terms of person, humans, whether it be Jew or non-Jew, whether it be table, house, furniture, you see, machine gun, right? Doesn't make a difference. Everything has a spiritual origin, and that is you up there. You see? And then what that does, it slowly degrades, and it becomes physical. You see? So we're really talking about one entity that has different appearances depending on which universe it's in. But it's really one thing. You see? Now that's a very important idea, because what it indicates, right, is that everything has an origin in Ruchni, in spirituality. You see? Now, what is it? What's that?
Does it filter on its own, or do Malachim take it?
Filter?
You said it degrades in steps, right?
Yes, yeah.
So who degrades it, or it degrades on its own?
It degrades on its own. I mean, that's unknown, you know. But ultimately, it will wind up here as let's say a dog, right? A dog has a spiritual counterpart, which is called dog. Now we have no idea what that is, but that's the origin of that dog, and it filters down, degrades, until it becomes a dog in the physical universe. Now, why is that interesting or important? Because what is interesting is that if you can manipulate your spiritual counterpart, you must conform to that spiritual counterpart. You see, it's against your will, because that's your physical body. For instance, if you can have access to that spiritual counterpart, right, and let's say you move it without knowing how it works, you know, let's say you perform an action which here would be movement, and up there something, just for explanation, you know, let's say you move that spiritual force, then all of a sudden you move and you don't even know why. It bypasses your consciousness, you see? It's like, in many ways, it's like a puppet or a marionette, right? The marionettes, right? You can move them and they follow the movement. There's no free will against that strings, right? They will follow the strings, you see? So that's a very important concept. Is that what?
Is that Kessin?
No. Let's go slow. Okay? So it's like a marionette, right? Except the origin of the marionette, whatever, right, is the two sticks, you know, and the strings. In this case, it's really you at a higher level. So if somebody manipulates that higher level spiritual you, then you will automatically conform to the movement of that origin, spiritual origin. You see? So therefore, what's interesting, you know, is that if you knew how to manipulate all those spiritual things, right, origins, right, that you could do anything you want, literally. Because whatever you're doing it to, the physical must conform to the spiritual. You see? That's a very important idea. Now, assigned to each one of them is a malach. And the malach has a sheet called instructions. That sheet, which is called instructions, right, tells the malach exactly what you need to do to move this spiritual entity. You see? That sheet is called teva. You cannot veer. In other words, there's a set of rules that the malach must conform to. That's its instructions, and therefore that malach can move that spiritual entity according to the instructions, right? And down here, whatever corresponds to that entity will immediately conform to the movement up there. So therefore, two ideas so far. One is that every physical entity has a spiritual counterpart, which is really that thing, and that degrades to become physical. Second thing is that there is a malach up there that is constantly manipulating that spiritual entity, and therefore the physical representation of that will automatically move in the same way. And the third thing is that there's a set of instructions. That's called teva, you see, which is interesting. That means if you can get the malach to not follow the instructions, all of a sudden, that thing that conforms would not follow the instruction, would not be teva. That would be magic. Magic is nothing more than breaking the rules or the instructions that are standard. That's really what magic is. It's a non-standard way of an object doing what it's not supposed to do. You see? But the way you do it is in somehow getting the malach, right? You say, okay, I want you to change the instruction. You see? What does that mean? For instance, you have a sefer, and you get the malach to change the instructions, and all of a sudden, this sefer will rise, levitate, against gravity. You see? And therefore, it must conform, and lo and behold, the sefer rises. You see? Which is pretty neat.
Try it out.
Yeah. Well, and there's whole ways of doing it, by the way, It's not simple. What?
Because tzaddikim were able to do this.
So wait, yeah, okay. So that's white magic and black magic, and you have to understand. But I'm showing you how it works. The way magic works. What is magic? Magic is fundamentally a deviation of teva, of the natural law. That's all it is. But the question is, what is natural law altogether? You see? So what is natural law? Natural law, whatever, is when the malach will do to this entity, spiritual entity, based on instructions, which it never violates. You see? And the fact that it always can be counted on to work in the same way, that's teva, that's nature, or natural law. You see? Therefore, if the malach will be forced to change its regular control over that object, then we look at that as magic. And it is magic. You see? So therefore, what reality is, and this is really what reality is every physical thing, I don't care what it is, has a spiritual counterpart that is in some way administered, controlled, directed, whatever you want to call it, by a malach, assigned to that particular thing. You see? And that's really, let's say, Kriyas Yamsuf, right? That Yamsuf should never have done what it did. How can the sea split? You see? But what Moshe Rabbeinu did, which is interesting, and that's how he did it, he was mashpia, the malach. That's really what he did. He was, and not mashpia, he influenced the malach that represents the Yamsuf, the Red Sea, right? And he said, okay, right now all you do is make it flow. I don't want that. I want you to split it. And all of a sudden the sea split. That's how it works, you see? And Moshe Rabbeinu did that. Of course, the Hashem told him to do that, whatever, and so on, but fundamentally, a miracle, all miracles occur because the malach changes the rules. That's a very important concept, you see. And therefore, there's a set of rules, as I said. For instance, if you go into the jungle and you meet a tiger, right? Well, that tiger has an origin in spirituality, right? In whatever olam, probably olam bria, right? It has an origin there. The problem is that the malach in charge of the tiger has a set of rules. See person, eat dinner. Right? That's the rule. You see? Right? So guess what? It sees you and it eats dinner. Because that's the rule. Like for instance by Doniel. Right? They threw him in the den of lions, and believe me, they didn't feed the lions for a couple of days. So anybody going into this is dinner immediately. They don't have to cook him up. They just eat the guy raw. You see? But Doniel went in, and in some way the malach changed the rules. You see? That the lions did not eat him. Because there was a whole deviation from the rules, Whether Doniel did that or the Bonsham did that doesn't make a difference. If the Baruch Hashem does that, then he'll do the same thing. Okay, Malach, Tova. They will not eat or kneel, and that's it. So all the Malach does is interact with the representation of the lions, and then nothing happens. You see? All the movements of anything that has no free will are completely controlled by the Malachim. You see? So therefore the motion starts from up there and goes down and influences the object. You see? So therefore anything that hasn't, all bugs, for instance, animals, whatever doesn't have free will always be influenced by the direction of the Malach on that spiritual counterpart. That's what happens,
So a deviation is either kishuf or a nes?
Yeah, kishuf is nothing more than a nes, but the one who changed. Well, we'll talk about the one who deviates the idea. Is not through holiness; it is through the Satan, because he also can control the malachim, and that's when it becomes kishuf. In other words, if you call the Satan, you must be the Satan, so to speak. By thinking about shemus, tumah, right? Then he will accommodate you because you've now aroused the Satan. He will take the malach and change it, and that's called kishuf. See? But the problem is that kishuf is when the Satan is doing the job of moving the malach, which is very bad because you are now using satanic forces, as they say, to do that job, and therefore the Satan now has a claim to you. You see? If you use him, then all of a sudden he now has a kesher to you. You see? But ultimately it's kishuf. You see? And it works because of that. All things in this world have the origin, and they will move based on the malach, if he's reading his directions or not. That's a very important fundamental structure of the Bria. So it comes out that in the spiritual universe, what do we have so far? We have malachim, right? And the second thing we have is koiches nivdolim, transcendental forces that are really spiritual representations of the entire physical universe. And since we are physical, and the third thing in the spiritual universe is the neshama, you see? So since we are the neshama connected in the body, right, to the guf, right, we can be controlled because of our bodies, not because of our neshama. Neshamas are not controlled in that manner by malachim, you see? But we who reside, the neshama who resides in the physical body, they can be controlled by the malachim, because that's what it is. Our physical body has a counterpart, the maila, you see?
Why not the neshama?
And neshama is not. Neshama is an entity independent of malachim. A malach can only control the spiritual entity that degrades into a physical, you see. But the malach has no control over a neshama. It's a separate entity. It's much greater than a malach, you see. They don't have the ability. It was never given over to them to control a neshama.
The malachim could control certain types of spiritual things in Shemayim.
That's only if they're assigned. If they're not assigned, they can't do anything. But they are basically assigned to control the whole structure of physical entities. You see, and that's it. So it comes out so far that there are what? There's the neshama in heaven, spiritual entity called the neshama, the soul. Then there's the malachim, angel, and the third thing is the transcendental force, those counterparts to the whole physical universe. You see? Those are the third spiritual forces. There's one more force which is spiritual, which is way above everything, and those are the spheres. Those are the ultimate powers or forces that emanate, in a certain sense, from God Himself. And they are not spiritual in a way. They are spiritual, but they're not like the lower three. They are emanations of the Ribono Shel Olam that controls everything. You see, it's like the fingers of God. You see? So in the end, you've talked about four different things in the spiritual world. You're talking about the spheres, then you're talking about the neshama, you're talking about malachim, and you talk about transcendental forces. That is basically the totality of the entire spiritual universe, you see. And these, of course, have repercussions, as I say, in terms of the control, who controls what, okay? Of course, in terms of the physical universe, which I will talk about more next week, you know. But so far, this is a setup, this is the whole Bria, and so on, you see. And once you understand that, the job of the Jew, which is really interesting, is to take the body and purify it, you see, where the body, in a certain sense, where the individual or the body itself now becomes spiritual and connects with its counterpart, you see, and the neshama will come into that, the neshama, which is really in the physical body, but it's apart from the physical body. But the physical body itself is connected to this spiritual counterpart in heaven. So when you do zikuch, when you purify the physical, you don't purify the neshama, like I mentioned last week with the whole task of a Jew is and so on. You purify the physical, so that physical now becomes as one with its spiritual counterpart. You see? And then the neshama, when it's in that type of a situation, when the neshama is now in the physical, that becomes when the neshama is now in the physical, that was the purification of the physical counterpart, and it's now become the spiritual, right? There is no more blockage of ruchnius in heaven. So that's really ultimately what it is to take the physical, right, to retransform the physical all the way up, right, into its spiritual counterpart, you see, and then the neshama will be in that, and then there's no blockage, you see, and so on. And then the whole, both ascend higher and higher into ultimately the Olam Haba itself, and see. You see how it works, the whole mechanism, the whole plan of how it works and so on, you know. Any questions?
Malachi Chavala, they used to be regular Malach.
Well, there's a whole concept of the fall, like the Bnei, you know.
There are two Malachim in the beginning of the Bria that fell.
Yeah. Well, those are the what do you call it, the Nephilim, yeah. They were formed on Malachim.
Can't be the only Malachi Chavala.
No. Malach Avola are really angels. I mean, Malachim, that are part of the entourage of these.
There are a whole bunch of fallen angels that are flying around, or is this created specifically to be Malachi Chavala?
What do you mean?
My question is, were Malachi Chavala, are the Malachi Chavala essentially Nephilim?
No, there's much more than that. No, of course not.
Were the Malachi Chavala created to be Malachi Chavala?
No. They are Malachim that felt that they can come down, right, to the earth, and they thought that they could manage.
That's only two of them.
Fine. No, but Malach Avola is not them.
Oh.
Malach is a whole kingdom there.
Right, so the Malachi Chavala were created to be Malachi Chavala.
Malachi Chavala were created to be as part of the Sitra Achra's domain.
So they were created as Malachim for the Sitra Achra.
Oh yeah, sure.
They weren't Malachim that were part of Shemayim, but then...
No. That's another group. That's a separate
so it's
group.
kind of anti-Malachim.
Anti-Malachim with the Nephilim?
No, the Malachi Chavala are kind of the flip side of Malachim. That's what you're saying?
No, there's Nephilim, right? But then there's a whole group called Malachi Chavala, angels of destruction.
So the Malachi Chavala were created kind of as agents of the Satan.
Yeah, as part of his, that's why it's called Sitra Achra,
so
the other side.
Agents that are completely spiritual as opposed to the Shadim, which are partial.
Yeah, Shadim are different, yeah, exactly. They're half physical and half spiritual. That's right, yeah. A lot of things going on.
Scary.
Okay. Scary? We live in it. You know?
In Pirkei Rebbe it says that Satan was brought down and he grabbed the coil with him. So
I know. Yeah, I tell you, there's a lot of this, you know, but let's keep it simple. You know? Anyway.
You mentioned Kochas Nivdolim. That
the what?
Kochas Nivdolim.
Kochas Nivdolim, yeah.
Right, that Malach could influence your body.
Yes, the ones that control, yeah.
Independent of your neshama. So neshama cannot prevent it, cannot stop it from happening?
No, because you're connected to the guf. You can't prevent it. As long as you're connected to the guf, you need to follow. It's like a rope that schlep you schlep along with it. The vulnerability of the neshama is because it's connected to the body. That's why it's so vulnerable. You see? So that's why the task of the neshama is to retransform the guf, where it won't be, and that itself is a process. In the beginning, it's the zikuch itself takes time, but ultimately what happens is that the body is retransformed, one, and the second thing is that the body, even the spiritual body, no longer has dominion over the neshama. The neshama is now complete control, even with a spiritual body that used to be a physical body. You see? But that takes another 1,000 years. And then the neshama is now the real, everything is in control, and the physical body, which is now the spiritual body, is now transparent, and it has no control, no dominion, it has no effect whatsoever on the neshama.
That's the Chad Charuv?
Well, that's the big Chad Charuv, is the transformation, but in the 8,000th years it really begins.
Also begins where the neshama is completely in control.
In control, yeah. The hashpah, the control of the neshama really starts in the year 8,000. In the 7,000th year, they're both equal. You see? So even though you transform, to a certain extent, the guf into its spiritual counterpart, but there's still an equality here. From the 8,000th year and 9,000 and so on, right? Then that ability of that spiritual entity that was the body loses complete dominion, has no influence whatsoever. You see, that's where you see when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Shemayim, he didn't eat. Yeah, where was he? He was in the same equivalent as the 7,000th year. With the Chad Charuv, yeah. Where his body had no influence whatsoever because he didn't have to eat or drink. It became what's called inert. Like a physically inert body.
Adam Rishon was in that, because you said he was in Priya, so was he in that state?
Yitzira.
In that state.
Which state was? You mean?
Yitzira, but he was still, the body had, some say.
Yeah, he said, yeah. Or else, what's he being,
So it's just funny that he was in Yitzira, but still the body had said.
But that's 7,000th year, where there's an equality. Olam Yitzir is the 7,000th year.
So Chad Charuv, you do have an equality. Once the year 8,000 hits,
then it begins exactly. Yeah, the 7,000th year is the equivalent of Olam Yitzira, so there is an equality. Right. So it can still influence you in that sense. It's only later on that it completely becomes inert, and it just exists as a transparent form, which ultimately is like I say, it's a spiritual entity. In other words, you've converted yourself from physical all the way up to being a spiritual entity.
Right.
You see? And then that has phases in terms of its ability to influence the neshama.
How is there no danger of failing again if there's equality? Because
it's be'itoi. It's the tikkun has done. That's why.
Hashem will make sure there's nobody does anything.
Yeah, because exactly, it's not dependent on merit. It's end. Be'ito is the end.
The nature of the universe at that point means that your work is done, so there's no more reason to give you bechira.
Yeah, not only that, something is destroyed. There's no evil.
But there's still a body that has needs.
Well, in the 7,000th years, it's equal to the neshama.
So it'll get its sustenance, whatever it needs.
And so on. Yeah. So you begin to see now what the job is. Relationship between the physical and the spiritual, that the physical itself has a spiritual counterpart, and the trick is to get this back up into that, and then to remove the influence of that spiritual force, where the neshama now completely dominates. You see? And the concept of malachim, it's really a whole structure, where the kind of malachim, they control the spiritual counterpart that controls the physical, and everything basically is controlled by the malachim. And then the whole question of how can you manipulate the malachim other than its instruction sheet, which is teva. That's really what teva is. It's complex, but that's basically. But you see how it all fits in terms of the tikkun. Okay, great.